Shahram Hadian was born in Iran in 1971. His parents moved to America to escape the oppressive Islamic regime that took over the country in 1979. Shahram then converted to Christianity and eventually became a pastor. We'll talk to Pastor Hadian today on politics and religion.
Look, there are two things I don't discuss: politics and religion.
In my house, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion.
I'll talk to you about anything except politics and religion.
I never talk about politics and religion.
Politics determines how we'll live here on earth. Religion determines how we'll live forever. I'm Irvin Baxter. I think it's time we talk about it. Welcome once again to Politics and Religion. We have a very special guest with us today on the program. And I'm very happy to bring to you Shahram Hadian. He is originally from Iran, now living in the United States of America. He also was a Muslim, now converted to Christianity. We're going to hear his story, plus we're going to hear his message today on politics and religion. So let's go there right now. Quickly going to Pastor Shahram Hadian. Very welcome to the program, Shahram.
Well, it's such an honor to be on the program with you. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, I'm so interested in your life because I'm very intimately acquainted with that part of the world. And I heard you were from Iran, and of course Iran is such a controversial place today. Some people say it's the center for world terrorism. And you were born there in 1971. Your parents moved you away in 1978. That means that you were still pretty much a child when you left there. But just take a moment to tell us of some of your memories of living in Iran.
Well, my memories are so positive, actually, because at that time Iran was under the Shah. You know, he was a monarch, but there was relative freedom. There was relative religious freedom. There were, Assyrian Christians. Of course, there was Muslims. Those who come from a Zoroastrian background. So the Shah as a monarch was relatively, open as far as religious freedom. Of course, every monarch has their issues, but Iran was just very westernized. It was just an incredible place, and so my memories are so positive, and yet, in the midst of all that, my father and my parents, my dad was in the military under the Shah. He retired in 1976 because they knew that things were shifting, and there was Islam was beginning to gain momentum again, and there was a push to bring back Ayatollah Khomeini, who had been outcast to Europe, to France, and so he got out of the military, and we were actually not supposed to leave Iran until 1979. But things were moving quickly, so he came home. One day I remember my parents sitting us down and saying, we need to leave as soon as we can, and literally packed our suitcases and got the first flight we could, which was, I think, about a couple of weeks later. And just under 6 weeks after we left, the coup happened, the government was overthrown, they ousted the Shah, and they brought Khomeini back in. So I look back on my life, and I believe I see the hand of God on it, but it was a remarkable timing for us to get out with that urgency, given what has happened in Iran since, with being a completely Islamic-controlled country now for the last 37 years.
Well, I'm very interested in knowing what was it. I'm sure your parents have told you the story. What was it that caused them to all of a sudden say, "Hey, everybody, pack up. We got to go now"? What was it that happened?
Well, there was a lot of talk in the news about the purging of Iran, because there was many in Iran who, as moderate or as Muslim fundamentalists, who wanted Iran to go back to an Islamic country. Of course, Iran, the history of Persia is not Islamic. That's what sometimes people make mistakes on is that they think Iran means Islamic. I mean, we know the history of Persia, the biblical history of Persia. So Iran is Persia. It's Elam in the scriptures is Persia. But there were those who were pushing for a return or allowing Islam to flourish there. And because my parents, my dad was more culturally Muslim, they just never really practiced. There was concerns there that once Islam took over, they were going to really become hardliners, which they did, and they were going to squash, freedom of speech, the media, religion, things like that. And for my parents, as I said, they my dad had seen the writing on the wall enough to know that he needs to get out of the military, because actually several of his friends who were higher ranking than he was a lieutenant colonel when he retired. There were several who were generals who then were executed because they would not leave. And when Khomeini came in, he rounded up a lot of the people that were in the military and executed some of the higher ranking officials. So there was also a personal cost for my dad because they were afraid, that he would maybe be in that camp. The amazing thing is, Irvin, as you know, unfortunately, the United States government had a hand in that. At that time, Carter, who was president, helped support the overthrow of the Shah and bringing in Khomeini. And so here we are in 2015, and we've seen this pattern again with this government, this administration, helping to overthrow Egypt and Libya and other places, thinking that somehow it's going to get better. And when you bring in Islamic fundamentalists, things just get worse. Nothing gets better usually.
So what was really the thinking of President Jimmy Carter that he supported the overthrow of the Shah and brought in this regime that's really vexed the world since that time? Well, why did he do this?
Well, that could be the magic question, because it's hard to know exactly what they were thinking. I think very much so at that, maybe not like today, because I personally feel like this current president has a completely different agenda. I think Carter, there was a naivety there. There's a foolishness of thinking that they can maybe, bring moderation or maybe bring something better. I got to think that they were thinking that they can control Khomeini more, that they could maybe, because the Shah had been a friend of the United States, but for some reason Carter did not get along with him. From what I understand, I remember my dad telling me that that they just were not friends, and they were not seeing the Shah as an ally. I got to think that in their naivety, they thought maybe they can control Khomeini more, they can control it, but you can't control Islam. Once they came in and established an Islamic government, as you've said, Iran has become, the greatest, supporter of jihad and terrorism in the world, as far as a country is concerned, and it remains probably the single greatest threat today, as far as a country, that we're facing potentially in the days ahead. But it's hard to know exactly his thinking, because even today, Carter will go and speak. Just recently, last year, last year, he spoke at a conference for a group called ISNA, which is the Islamic Society of North America. We know it's a front group for the Muslim Brotherhood. So why would Jimmy Carter go and speak at this group? It's hard to know, but maybe they actually believe that they can control it, they can all get along and have this interfaith dialogue. And in my opinion, it's foolishness. It doesn't work.
So just so our listeners, our viewers can really understand what was going on in Iran during your childhood, some of the people of Iran were obviously moderates. Your parents apparently were Muslim, but in a apparently moderate way. Were there at that time others who, like the women dressed in burqas, they really were already practicing very strict Islam, while you were there and your family were more moderate? Give us a little glimpse of how that mixed worked before the Iron Heel of Ayatollah Khomeini really came down. What was the situation before the shift?
Well, you're absolutely right. There were those who were practicing fundamentalist, very strict Islam. I remember seeing it. You would be in the streets and you'd see, women dressed in European clothes, Western clothes, with makeup and a nice dress and heels. And then you'd also see women walking around in the full chador, in the full burqa. But because the Shah was running the government in a secular manner, very similar to what Saddam Hussein was doing in Iraq, where he had a tight grip. So therefore, there was sort of a not a blend, but at the same time, you saw sort of a secularism and the fundamentalist Muslims at the same time. But there was a control mechanism there, and good or bad, it was there. And so that's what I remember seeing growing up, is that they were sort of going on side by side. But of course, those who are fundamentalists in Islam, Urban, there is no lukewarm Islam. There is, I always say, there can be moderate Muslims, but there is no moderate Islam. Moderate Muslims are really Muslims who don't practice fully their ideology. Just like someone says, I'm a moderate Christian. I'm not quite sure what that means anymore, because does that mean they don't believe in all of the Bible? They don't, So my dad, who was more culturally Muslim, he would say, I'm a Muslim, but yet did I ever see him go to the mosque? Maybe twice in my life. Did I ever see them pray 5 times a day? Never. So it was more of a cultural thing. But the Islamists were always pushing for that overthrow. And, here in 2011, the media coins what happened in the Middle East as the Arab Spring. Of course, we know it was really an Islamic revolution. But really, the first Islamic revolution in our lifetime happened in Iran. It was 1978, 1979, because that overthrow brought in a fully formed Islamic country, a theocracy under Islamic law. And that push was there. That support system was there in Iran, that push to turn it to Islam. And, whatever the circumstances were, it happened. They overthrew the Shah, and Iran has been governed under Islamic, that tight Islamic oppressive control for the 36, 37 years.
We've got a lot to talk about today, but I want to probe just a little bit deeper on this point so that we can gain an understanding. I mean, in Iran, you had the strict fundamentalist Islamists, and then you had folks like your parents that were just Islamists, really in name only, pretty much.
Right.
How does that fit around the world today for Islam? What percentage of Muslims in our world today would be considered the fundamentalist type, and then how many of them would be more like your parents were, and different countries, Indonesia? Just give us a little bit of insight, because most of us don't really have a good grip on that.
That's a fantastic question, and it's sometimes a hard question to accurately answer. My estimation of the worldwide population, and actually in the DVD, The True Goal of Islam, the Threat of Sharia Law, I share a study that was done after 9/11 by Georgetown University. It was actually a study that was done by Muslims, so I used their own study.
I'll tell you what, Shahram, hang right there, because we're up against a break. We'll finish answering that question as soon as we get back. You're listening to Politics and Religion.
Watch the prophecies come alive on End of the Age every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Central Time on TBN. If you're wondering questions like, why is anti-Semitism rising in our world again? What are the 7 trumpets? And what about the Antichrist? Where will he come from? What will happen at the second coming of Christ? And what is even my place in the end time? All these questions are answered on our End of the Age television program. You can watch it on TBN, the Church Channel, Daystar, and more. Call us at 1-800-ENDTIME to find what station End of the Age is on in your area. That's 1-800-363-8463. or go to endtime.com and click the broadcast link.
If ever people need to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for Endtime magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will really impact your life. Endtime has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that Endtime magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctors' offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine did in my life. Call 1-800-363-8463. That's 1-800-ENDTIME and get your subscription today.
Our guest today is Pastor Shahram Hadian. He is formerly a Muslim, now a Christian pastor, originally born in Iran in 1971. And we're talking today about what happened in Iran, what's happening in the world. He's produced a DVD, and as a matter of fact, he may tell you more about this, but let me go ahead and introduce you to it. The DVD is entitled The True Goal of Islam and the Threat of Sharia Law in America. If you are interested in obtaining this, you may go to the website, www.tilproject.com, or you can call 425-772-8222. Now, Shahram, tell us a little bit more about your DVD before we get back to our question that we were discussing. Tell us a little bit more about this work that you've put together here.
Sure. The DVD came out of really partially, first of all, my story, and then as I became a Christian 16 years ago, just watching what has been happening around the world, and particularly in America, with regards to Islam. What troubled me was, particularly as a pastor as well, is that many people, including Christians, do not have really an understanding of what Islam as an ideology is. There seems to be a sort of a hands-off approach, more about, we don't want to offend, we don't want to upset Muslims, but we really need to understand what the actual teachings and ideology of Islam are, what the goal of Islam, what their world agenda is, because they have a very specific world agenda that is very counter to the Bible, to the Word of God, and also specifically understanding what is happening in America with regards to the implementation of Sharia law. What is Sharia law? What is their law? What is their goals as far as implementing their law? And so it really has come on the world stages now in the last number of years. People are becoming more aware of these things, but this was the heart of this presentation, was to just get that information out, give people a basis of knowledge so they can then know how to pray and engage, and of course, most importantly, as Christians, continue to share a bold gospel with all people, including Muslims, because it's desperately needed. And subsequently to that presentation, we've of course done other presentations on updating these topics and giving more information on Islam. And it's critical that we're able to continue to combat a lot of the deception from the media, from our government, a lot of the propaganda that we're seeing in wanting to protect Islam. Of course, the number one thing that we're hearing today, Irvin, as you know, is people are saying, groups like Islamic State, that's not really Islamic. It's some sort of a weird aberration. It's some sort of a radicalism. And we try to point out that actually a lot of the behavior of the Islamic State or other groups is consistent with the history of Islam, with the history of the Prophet of Islam, and that's a lot of what our ministry is about, is to speak the truth in love about these very difficult subjects that are oftentimes very controversial.
Shahram, is this a single DVD?
This one is a single DVD, correct. And we have other DVDs that I've done subsequently in dealing with other issues on Islam. We actually are working on a second DVD right now that is titled Unveiling the True Face of Islam, that is sort of a part two to the DVD that you've highlighted, but that one is not quite out in production yet. We're just finishing the editing and so far on that DVD.
Okay,
we'll be getting
so
that out soon as well.
So if you would like to have a copy of the DVD, The True Goal of Islam and the Threat of Sharia Law in America, the website is www.TIL, that's Truth in Love, but abbreviated, www.tilproject.com, or you can call this number 425-772-8222 to obtain your own copy of this DVD. Now, I want to get right back into our subject because I asked a question that's really been on my mind for a long time, and I thought perhaps you could give us some insight. And I want to repeat the question so that everybody can go along with us here. But when we talk about world Islam, they claim to be somewhere between 1.5 and 1.7 billion people in the world, right at 1/4 of the world's population. So when you talk about Muslims, we have this mix, of course, all the way from what might be considered moderate Muslims or almost secular Muslims, all the way to the very fundamental Muslims that would wear the burqas and so on and so forth. Could you just give us a little bit of a feel, Shahram, as to what percentage occupies the different positions? How many of them believe that Islam is supposed to conquer the world and to rule the world? How many of them now have moved to America? I know I have a neighbor that is Islamic. They've just moved in recently. I got an invitation the other day to join them for a Ramadan dinner to celebrate the end of Ramadan. And I know it's their way of reaching out to try to convert people to Islam.
Exactly.
So consequently, what I want to know is, who's living next door? What do they believe? How strong are they? What's their ultimate goal? I know this is a big question, but just talk to us a little bit about that for a while.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned before the break, in the DVD, there's a study that I highlight from Georgetown University. They have an Islamic studies program there now. Of course, that was funded by Saudi Arabia, so you can know that it's going to be biased. But they did a study after 9/11 of surveying the world's Muslim population. According to this study, they claim that that one of the questions they asked was, do you believe that 9/11 was justified, that it was the will of Allah, their God, and so forth and so on? And according to the study, 7% of the people were a complete 5. It was a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being you were completely in favor of 9/11, you completely believe that it was Allah's will to attack America and to advance the goal of Islam, and 7% were 5s. Well, when you look at the study, there was another percentage that were 4s and 3s. And so when you add those numbers up, you get about 32 to 33%. In my estimation, some people say about 20% of the world's Muslim population are fundamental. I believe that number is higher. I believe that it's more in the 30 to 35% range. Now, so that means that 60 to 65% of Muslims in the world, in my estimation, are either the two categories you mentioned. They're either agnostic or atheistic Muslims, or they are lukewarm, what we would term as moderate, but really in Islam they're lukewarm. So I'm not really worried about the atheistic Muslims, because a lot of those Muslims, when I talk to them, I'll ask them, have you ever read the Quran? No, I've never read it. Do you know what Sharia law is? No, I have no idea. So they're culturally, they're Muslim, they're born into Islam, and I would estimate that number is more than 50%. More than 50% of the world's Muslim population is agnostic, or maybe atheistic, and there's some in the middle there that are lukewarm. In Iran, you see that today, in fact, where a lot of younger people have rejected Islam, like I had actually coming out of Iran because of what I witnessed Islam do to my birth country. I had became more agnostic because I thought, if Allah is God, I don't want to have anything to do with God. So therefore, I really don't have a belief system until the gospel was presented to me. and I was exposed to finally to the true God of the universe rather than Allah. But my concern, Irvin, is with that 30%, is with that upper echelon, because they are fundamental. They believe and completely understand the global domination aspect of Islam. What we term in the DVD, there's a term in Islam called ikamatud deen. It's a deen means a commandment in Arabic. It is their commandment to spread the law of Allah, the Sharia, to the ends of the earth. Every nation must come under Islamic rule, and they're doing this to prepare the way for the coming of their Messiah. They have a Mahdi, a Messiah. Now, the Shiites and the Sunnis disagree a little bit about, who it is or how it's going to function, but they both believe in this coming Messiah. So that 30%, that upper echelon, they're the ones who control the money. They're the ones who are the groups that are advocating and advancing Islam, and that's who concerns me. Now, what happens to the question I've been asked oftentimes is, well, if Islam takes over in a country, what happens then to the lukewarm Muslims? What happens to the moderate Muslims? Well, they're going to have to either go along, like in Iran, or they themselves will be punished. And in Iran, we saw that. There were secular Muslims in Iran under the Shah who did not want a theocracy under Sharia. They wanted a quote-unquote democracy, what they thought was democracy. Well, many of them were jailed. Many of them were executed. Many of them had to flee. I had a cousin of mine who actually had to flee Iran because he was very outspoken against the Islamic government because he considered himself a secular Muslim. The problem is that a Muslim can think they're whatever they are, but you have the ideology of Islam. And Islam says, unless you are fundamental, you are an unbeliever. So a Muslim himself or herself can become an unbeliever if they are not fully following Islam. And that is why you see the Islamic State killing Muslims. Obama says they're not Islamic because they kill Muslims. No, that's happened since the history of Islam. Muhammad killed Arabs in the Arabic Peninsula because they were either backslidden or they were not following, accurately or properly what he was teaching. So we've seen that throughout the history, and so just to kind of wrap it up, my estimation is 30 to 35% are fundamentalist Muslims. They're very strict. They understand their agenda, and if the other Muslims don't go along with them when they take over, they themselves can, face consequences for that.
So right now, the Islamic State in Iraq and in Syria, they say that the Shia Muslims are heretics, and therefore they should be killed. So even though the Islamists of Iran are quite conservative and quite radical themselves, they're still bitter enemies. Can you briefly tell us, and we're getting close to a break here, but try to tell us quickly, what's the difference here? Why would Sunni Muslims want to kill Shia Muslims?
Well, that difference has gone back since the foundation of Islam. The break came after the fourth caliph. The Shiites believe that Ali is the proper caliph after Muhammad. The Sunnis believe that, and I believe the Sunni position is more accurate because you have the succeeding caliphs after Muhammad. So that was where the major break came. Irvin, the way I explained this is spiritually because I believe the Lord keeps the enemy's house divided so that he can never become totally unified. And the Sunnis and Shiites have been killing each other since 1400 years.
I'll tell you what, hold that right there. We're up against another break. We'll be back in just a moment.
If you've been through our Understanding the End Time 14 DVD series and want to continue to grow your knowledge of Bible prophecy, you will want our Increase Your Understanding package. This 10 DVD set includes lessons such as When Will the Rapture Happen? Will Islam rule the world? Signposts of the Second Coming. Israel's Future According to Bible Prophecy. Master Plan of the Dragon. Seeds of Armageddon. And more. Daniel 11:33 says, "And they that understand among the people shall instruct many." We've put together this set at a special price for those who are preparing themselves now to be ready to instruct many in the days ahead. Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-ENDTIME and ask for the Increase Your Understanding 10 DVD set.
My name is Vince, and my job is to oversee the Endtime web presence. I thought I'd take a little time during this commercial break and give you a mini tour of what Endtime.com has to offer. On our homepage, click the Watch button, and you can stream Irvin's broadcast live at 3 p.m. Central Time. You can also click Archives to access thousands of past episodes. We also have many other free videos to watch on our site, such as Another Jewish Holocaust Ahead and The Great Tribulation. Go to the Endtime store for video and audio downloads, books, DVDs, and more. Be sure to check out our blog, which features posts from Irvin Baxter, important Endtime updates, and prophecy articles. We also have a section for urgent questions, archive magazine articles, and, well, my time is about up. You're just going to have to finish the rest of the tour by checking out endtime.com on your computer, mobile phone, or tablet. Go to endtime.com and discover a world of prophecy today. That's endtime.com.
Our guest today is Shahram Hadian. He is a former Muslim, now a Christian pastor. He's produced a DVD entitled The True Goal of Islam and the Threat of Sharia Law in America. If you'd like to get your own copy, the website is www.tilproject.com, or you can call this number, 425-772-8222. Since our subject today is Islam, you might also be interested in something Endtime has produced. We have a DVD called Islam in Bible Prophecy. I think every person in the world needs to view this DVD right now. Just simply ask for Islam in Bible Prophecy. It's actually one of the DVDs in our 14-set series called Understanding the End Time. So, of course, you can get the entire series, which I think you should do. But if you can't do that right now, the one DVD, Islam in Bible Prophecy, and, of course, our number is 1-800-ENDTIME, or you can go to endtime.com. Now, right back to our guest here with Shahram Hadian. There's so much I want to ask you that I find myself seeing what I want to cram in next. But I'll tell you what, let's jump to something I think is really important and really critical. And that is, we've got 4 wars boiling in the Middle East: Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya. Do you have a sense of what each of these wars is about? Is it the same thing that's motivating all of it? What's your take on that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier in the show, when you look at Egypt and Libya, when you look at Syria, Jordan, when you look at Yemen, a lot of that was actually started going back a few years now. So when the so-called Arab Springs, which was really an Islamic revolution that was happening, an uprising, within Islam, because countries, those that are, let me say it this way, those that are fundamentalists to Islam will understand the goal of Islam, that they must implement Sharia, the law, because that's one of their commandments. They must implement this in nations and across the world. So you saw this with Egypt, with Libya, with they're trying with Syria, with Jordan, with places like Yemen. These are places that were controlled either by dictators or by monarchs. And in Islam, the true Islam, that is a abomination. That's shirk. That's they believe that's heretical. So therefore, they have to be overthrown, and you have to establish a government that then would set up the Sharia, the law, and that's what you saw in Egypt before the military stepped in with El-Sisi. That's what you saw in the attempt in Libya now. That's what they're trying to do in Syria with the uprising there of the Islamic State, at that time, of course, of Iraq and Syria, which then they changed their name to the Levant, and now to the Islamic State, declaring themselves to be, the caliphate. So the consistent pattern is that all of these places, when you look at Yemen, You look at the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, all these places. Ultimately, the fundamentalists believe that these must be turned into an Islamic state. And yet, the irony of it is that you have Saudi Arabia, you have the monarchs there that are funding the Muslim Brotherhood, they're funding ISIS behind the scenes, and yet they're themselves a threat. So this is what I was saying before the break. This is the divided house that you see within Islam. It doesn't make any sense unless you look at it from a spiritual context and understand the Lord has kept this house divided because, my goodness, when they work together, it's a formidable enemy, but yet they also fight amongst each other. And all those monarchies must come down in order for the Islamic caliphate to be reestablished.
Now, Shahram, we've seen the very rapid advance of what was called ISIS, now that it's called the Islamic State. As of today, they occupy about 75% of Syria, somewhere around 50% of Iraq. They control 40% of the Euphrates River right now. They're very close to the borders of Jordan. Also, they would love to take Saudi Arabia, I'm sure, since they claim to be the caliphate, since they claim to be the representative of Islamics all over the world. They would love to control the headquarters for Islam, Mecca and Medina. What's the chance that the Islamic State will make an attempt to take over Saudi Arabia?
Wow, that's a good question. Well, just as I was saying, I think that's why you see, the reason you see the monarchs, the reason you see the crown princess in Saudi Arabia financially behind the scenes supporting Islamic State is so that that wouldn't happen, because they're trying to consolidate their power base in Saudi Arabia. I mean, there's a weird dichotomy with Saudi Arabia within both the Sunni sect, which is the Islamic State, and Saudi with the Wahhabism or the Salafism Islam. But you also see an interesting dichotomy with Iran, because Iran and Saudi hate each other, partially because of the Sunni Shiite thing, and yet they will oftentimes work together on some bigger projects. So the chance of the Islamic State going into Saudi Arabia, that's a good question. I think some would argue that that won't happen because of the funneling of money, of the fact that quietly Saudi is supporting the Islamic State's efforts. We know that there's the Saudis have actually supported militarily the jihadists through money, through armament and things like that. Of course, the CIA now, we know, was also sending armament from Libya to Syria and arming the Islamic State. So we know that is a part of it as well. But Saudi is a hard question to answer. But I don't know exactly whether it will happen. All I can tell you is what we see behind the scenes is they're trying to keep their power base, the crown princes, so that the Islamic State would not go towards them and will continue to advance more westward. They're in Libya now, and of course, here's the other piece that for us in America, we now know, according to the FBI, that they're now in Mexico, that they have an influence now in Mexico working with the drug cartel. We have seen for years Hezbollah working with the drug cartel in Mexico, and of course the Islamic State's influence in America, which the media refuses to talk about, with the attack on Garland, Texas, and so forth and so on, where that was the Islamic State. Those guys claimed to be recruits of the Islamic State. So they're growing, I think, faster than people realize. They have an incredible social media presence, and they're being funneled from behind the scenes by countries like Saudi in order to maintain their power base. I think one of the things you have to watch out for, too, is look for the dichotomy between Iran and Saudi. Many have said, and I agree with this, that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, a full nuclear weapon, Israel would not be the only target. Some believe that Saudi could be a target. Mecca, which is bizarre when you think about why would they want to hit Mecca, but there are some who within the fundamentalist Islam who believe that the decadence of Saudi Arabia is shirk to Islam. It is, again, something that is, basically forbidden because true Muslims shouldn't have that level of decadence with what you see in Qatar and UAE and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. But
okay.
I know that's a weird one.
Yeah, let me take this one step further. We know that Saudi Arabia is Sunni and rather strict and fundamental Sunni, and at the same time the Islamic State claims to be Sunni, yet there's some fear that the Islamic State will invade Saudi Arabia. Let me ask you this way, and this to me is maybe my most important question today, Shahram. If in fact the Islamic State invaded Saudi Arabia successfully, came into control of it with all of its oil riches, at what tipping point would Muslims around the world rise up and say, oh, this caliphate is for real. Let's join together. The caliphate, the last one, was the Ottoman Empire. That came to an end with World War I. And so let's rise up, let's join together. It's time to do this. At what tipping point, and the reason I'm asking this is because there's a prophecy in the Bible in Revelation chapter number 9 that states a war will emanate from the Euphrates River, and the result of that war will be the killing of 1/3 of the human race. So if this caliphate really rose up in all of its power, and especially if it threatened to truly control the oil of the world, what would there be that would trigger this into a world war that the United States would be compelled to enter because they couldn't stand for the Islamic State to control the oil of the world? When you put all this together, I guess my question to you is, from your opinion anyway, at what's the tipping point where Muslims would say, oh, our caliphate has arrived, let's join it now? What do you think?
Well, I think certainly if the Islamic State, again, if the powers that be in Saudi Arabia could not control the Islamic State, and they actually went after Saudi, taking the holy sites of Mecca and Medina, and like you said, the oil, really that's the heart, obviously Saudi Arabia is the heart of Islam. I think that would be the tipping point. I think that if that actually happened, because we have to understand that the Sunni population is the majority of Muslims. Over 80% of the worldwide Muslims are Sunni. Only a smaller percentage are Shiite. And then there's a very, very small sect of these Sufi Muslims that claim to be peaceful, early Islam Muslims. But I think that would be a tipping point. I think that would force, a large percentage of the world's Muslim population, because now you have a power base that would be staggering for Islam, and that's why the underestimating the Islamic State and the way that this administration has dealt with them has been so egregious to not understanding the real threat that they face. So that would be a major shift. Now you still have Iran. And Iran with their proxy in Syria, although Syria, as you mentioned, is very depleted now. So Iran really is the major Shiite force in the world, and that's why I think you would see potentially a battle going on there. But to answer the question, I guess, or at least to speculate, the Sunni Muslim population would have to go along. That would be the tipping point, because now the Islamic State had that level of control. They're the ones who are dictating. They're saying, we are returning back to a true Islam. We are returning
Hold
back
it right
to
there, if you would, please. We'll be back.
Hey, Micah, what you doing?
Oh, I'm just jumping on this great deal. Endtime has 4 DVDs about the coming one world religion that are normally $80, but I'm getting them for $65.
Wow, where did you hear about that deal?
Don't you get Endtime's e-newsletter?
No, what's that?
Well, when Endtime has a special sale going on, those who subscribe to the e-newsletter and promotions are the first to know. Plus, every Friday they send out a Prophecy in the News update letting you know the important stories that happened that week concerning Bible prophecy.
That does sound like a pretty good deal, but I'm sure they send out tons of emails, and I cannot afford to get any more emails.
No, Endtime is pretty good about that. They only send about 3 a week. Besides, can you afford to miss out on this great deal and pay full price? I see those are new shoes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, how do you sign up for this?
You just go to endtime.com and on the bottom of the homepage, click the subscribe button.
Perfect. I'm doing it now. Oh, and maybe I should unsubscribe from some of these shoe stores.
Yeah, that might help you out.
I grew up in church, and like most kids, I learned the 10 Commandments. But the 4th commandment bothered me through the years. What does it mean to keep the Sabbath? Am I supposed to keep it like they did in the Old Testament? That's why I was glad to hear Irvin come out with the new DVD, To Sabbath or Not to Sabbath. Like most end time videos, I was enlightened to see what had been in the Bible all along, but didn't know it was there. He laid out the scriptures in an easy-to-follow lesson, and now I don't have to worry anymore. I know how to keep the Sabbath. Get your copy today.
Once again, our guest today is Pastor Shahram Hadian, and he formerly is from Iran, born there, moved to America, then became a Christian. Now, I've got a jillion questions we need to ask here, but we have only got a short time left. Let me maybe go to the question of the day. We're all trying to figure out, okay, President Obama apparently wants to bring the Sunnis to power in some areas, it appears. He's against Bashar al-Assad of Syria. He was definitely for the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, very disappointed when they were dethroned. Got to ask you this point blank, Shahram. Do you believe that President Obama is really a Muslim?
I have no doubt about it. I know some would say that he's more of a Islamic Muslim. The idea that, if you look at the history behind his stay with Reverend Wright and the church, that's the so-called church in Chicago that he was a part of, where Reverend Wright has come out and point blank said, when he came to me, I made it easy for him to understand Jesus and yet not leave his Islamic background. I personally believe that President Obama is absolutely a Muslim and that he knows what he's doing. I believe that he's operating in taqiyya. When he says he's a Christian, he's deceiving us. He's lying because nothing of the fruit of his life, of his actions, demonstrate that he is a Christ follower, and yet he continues to always, not once have I heard him criticize Islam, not one time. And there's a couple of things from Islamic law that I use to cite this, Irvin, and it's not just speculation. Number one, when a child is born to a Muslim father, that child under Islamic law is Muslim. That's just fact. That's accepted Sharia law over the centuries of Islam. So Obama was born to a Muslim father. Now, the only way that you stop being a Muslim, if you're born to a Muslim father, because the mother's religion does not matter in Islam, then the only way you can stop is to renounce Islam. You have to publicly come out and renounce it or denounce it and say, I'm no longer a Muslim. I've become something else. We've never heard this president renounce Islam. We've never heard him say one thing negative about Islam. We see him defending Islam at every turn. We see him, for example, when he had the father, Bob Bergdahl, the father of that soldier, at the White House press conference. The father recited the Bismillah prayer, on the lawn of the White House. You see the president smile. I don't know if you ever saw that video, but it was a pretty remarkable video when the father is reciting the Bismillah prayer, and the president actually has a smile on his face, and then he kind of catches himself. People can go and look on YouTube and watch that video. So from an Islamic standpoint, he's a Muslim. He's never renounced being a Muslim. He went to Islamic school in Indonesia. And secondly, I look at his current actions. I look at when he has taken over, and as you said, his push to overthrow government and to establish and to work with the Muslim Brotherhood. In fact, There are those in Egypt now. They have presented in Egypt charges in the Egyptian courts now under President El-Sisi that Obama and Clinton conspired to overthrow Mubarak and gave $8 billion to the Muslim Brotherhood to overthrow the government. So the fruit has to speak for itself. At some point as Christians, we have to say, look, are we not to judge the fruit? And everything about him communicates that he is a Muslim, he supports Islam, he is trying to establish Islam here and around the world. And interestingly enough, people have asked him, what about this thing now that he's trying to buddy up to Iran because he's been so supportive of the Sunnis? I think that's an appeasement strategy because, again, on major issues, you will see the Sunnis and the Shiites work together. In Iran, they have had conferences where they have invited the Sunnis to come together when they've talked about some of their end-time goals. They've actually had conferences in Iran hosted by Khamenei, the supreme leader, and they've been talking about their end-time goals, their end-time global agenda. They've worked with the Sunnis. So it's a weird dichotomy, but to me, there should be no doubt that this president is Islamic and that he lies, that he's deceiving us about his so-called being a Christian. And I try to present that from a very factual aspect, not just speculation.
Well, you know, when he made his first speech in Cairo, the first year of his presidency, all of us were trying to figure out who is Barack Hussein Obama. And as he was making that speech, when he said the call to prayer by the imam in the evening is the most beautiful sound on earth, I thought,
Correct.
Wait a minute. He's a Christian. He says he's a Christian. How can he say that? And it startled me. And from that day on, I had my doubts, even though, of course, he continued to affirm, oh, yes, I am a Christian. But nevertheless, that was such a telling thing that he said.
Absolutely. And here's the interesting thing about that speech. That speech was done at Al-Azhar University, the most premier Islamic school in the world. The audience, most people do not know, was handpicked. It was members of the Muslim Brotherhood back then. And he didn't just say, actually, he also made that statement when he was running for president in 2007, calling the azan, or the call of prayer, the most beautiful sound in the world. But even, Urban, if you remember in that speech in Cairo, he said at least 6 times, and I read the transcripts, at least 6 times, the Holy Quran, the Holy Quran, the Holy Quran, the Holy Quran. So you go, well, why would a Christian be espousing the Quran as such a holy, beautiful thing, the call to prayer, and yet we've seen recently, we're at the prayer breakfast, him saying that we need to get off our high horses and comparing the Islamic State to the Crusaders, saying that Christians need to be more loving. Again, I have not one time heard him say anything derogatory about Islam. Not one time. And of course, we know that every time something happens by a jihadist like Major Hassan in Fort Hood, or the 2 guys in Garland, Texas, or the attacks in Paris, or the beheading of the Libyans, or the Egyptian Copts in Libya, Obama will come out and will not say they're Christians, will not condemn Islam in any way. He will continue to defend Islam and say, oh, this is not Muslim, this is not Islamic, or, Fort Hood, it's workplace violence. I mean, it is just, at some point, it's just nonsense. It just gets to be lunacy. And we have to, again, as believers, look at the fruit, judge the spirit, look at the fruit of a man, and not just what they're saying. And most Christians do not know that Muslims are permitted to lie in the early house of Islam. When they are in the early house, which is called Dar al-Harb, if they're in a nation where they don't have the upper hand, the taqiyya, the concept of al-taqiyya, the concept of deceiving the unbelievers to protect your own conscience, is completely permissible under Islamic law until they get the upper hand. And it's interesting, if you look at Europe now, you notice that the Islamists in Europe are no longer lying. They're saying to our faces, our goal is we're going to implement Sharia, we're going to take over Europe. They're not talking about coexistence anymore, are they? They're not talking about, this is going to be multicultural bliss and we're all going to get along. They're saying flat out, we are going to take over Europe, and we can call them radicals, but they're really the fundamentalists. In America, because we're still in the Dar al-Harb, the house of war, that early house, You see Muslim groups like the Muslim Brotherhood Care, so forth and so on. They will continue to say, "Oh, we just want to coexist and live peacefully," and that's the other fallacy, right? Islam being a peaceful religion. My goodness, that's one that we have to continue to refute all the time. There's two things that I talk about in my presentation that are very, very foundational. One is Islam is not a religion of peace. Their definition of peace can only be achieved when they have the upper hand. So if they're in control and everybody submits to Islam, then you have peace. Otherwise, you don't have peace. Number two, or when I talk about the fact that Islam is not a religion. Islam is a governmental system that has religious components. Only less than 15% or so of all of Sharia deals with religious aspects like Ramadan, like their daily prayers, like the 5 pillars. The majority of the Sharia, which there's a book, if people are interested in knowing what Muslims, are supposed to follow, there's a book called The Reliance of the Traveler that is over 1,000 years of accepted Sharia law. We use that all the time as a reference point. The majority of the Sharia deals with governmental, military, economic, financial, marriage, societal, custody. It is a government to the world, not a religious system. So those are some things that I'm trying to at least put out there for people to change their dialogue, because we keep calling it a religion. And it is not. It is not a religious system. It's only a small part of it.
Shahram, we are totally out of time. Our guest today, Shahram Hadian. We certainly appreciate you being on with us today, and we'll want to do it again someday. However, I want to tell everybody out there, Shahram has produced a DVD that you probably will want to get for yourself. And that is The True Goal of Islam and the Threat of Sharia Law in America. That is something that all of us as Americans certainly are concerned about right now. In order to obtain your own copy, the website is simply www.til, that's Truth in Love, tilproject.com. One more time, www.tilproject.com. Or you can call this number, 425-772-8222. So thank you very much, Pastor Shahram Hadian. We appreciate having you on with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a blessing.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would remind you once again about our DVD concerning Islam, Islam in Bible Prophecy. It is there. It's clear. You can know it, and you do need to know it. You can order that by calling us here at Endtime Ministries, 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. You can also get it at endtime.com. The name of the DVD is Islam in Bible Prophecy. Islam in Bible Prophecy.
Politics and Religion is a production of Endtime Ministries. It is a daily 1-hour broadcast dedicated to bringing you the prophetic fulfillments happening on a daily basis.
If you would like to listen to archive shows, subscribe to Endtime Magazine, find a prophecy conference in your area, order Endtime resources, watch our TV show, or subscribe to our free weekly e-news, call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com. and take advantage of what our site has to offer.
Connect to Endtime Ministries by partnering with us and help this message make a global impact.
Endtime Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to all of our loyal partners, listeners, and friends for helping make Politics and Religion and Endtime Ministries possible.